Your Majesties, Your Royal Highness, Excellencies, distinguished members of the Nobel Committee, dear friends. Long years ago, sometimes it seems many lives ago, I was at Oxford listening to the radio program Desert Island Disc with my young son, Alexander. It was a well-known program, for all I know it still continues, on which famous people from all walks of life were invited to talk about the 8 discs, the one book beside the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare, and the one luxury item they would wish to have with them were they to be marooned on a desert island. At the end of the program, which we had both enjoyed, Alexander asked me if I thought I might ever be invited to speak on desert island discs. Why not? I responded lightly. Since he knew that in general, only celebrities took part in the program, he proceeded to ask me with genuine interest why I thought I might be invited. I considered this for a moment and then answered, perhaps because I'd have won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And we both laughed. The prospect seemed pleasant, but hardly probable. I cannot now remember why I gave that answer, perhaps because I had recently read a book by a Nobel laureate, or perhaps because the desert island celebrity of that day had been a famous writer. In 1989, when my late husband Michael Ayres came to see me during my first term of house arrest, he told me that a friend, John Finnis, had nominated me for the Nobel Peace Prize. This time I also laughed. For an instant Michael looked amazed. Then he realized why I was amused. The Nobel Peace Prize, a pleasant prospect, but quite improbable. So, how did I feel when I was actually awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace? The question has been put to me many times, and this is surely the most appropriate occasion on which to examine what the Nobel Prize means to me and what peace means to me. As I have said repeatedly in many an interview, I heard the news that I had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize on the radio one evening. It did not altogether come as a surprise, because I had been mentioned as one of the front runners for the prize in a number of broadcasts during the previous week. While drafting this lecture, I've tried very hard to remember what my immediate reaction to the announcement of the award had been. I think I can no longer be sure. I think it was something like, oh, so they've decided to give it to me. It did not seem quite real, because in a sense, I did not feel myself to be quite real at that time. Often, during my days of house arrest, it felt as though I were no longer a part of the real world. There was a house, which was my world. There was the world of others, who also were not free, but who were together in prison as a community. And there was the world of the free. Each one was a different planet, pursuing its own separate course in an indifferent universe. What the Nobel Peace Prize did was to draw me once again into the world of other human beings, outside the isolated area in which I lived, to restore a sense of reality to me. This did not happen instantly, of course, but as the days and months went by and news of reactions to the award came over the airwaves, I began to understand the significance of the Nobel Prize. It had made me real once again. It had drawn me back into the wider human community. And what is more important, the Nobel Prize had drawn the attention of the world to the struggle for democracy and human rights in Burma. We were not going to be forgotten. To be forgotten. The French say that to part is to die a little. To be forgotten too is to die a little. It is to lose some of the links that anchor us to the rest of humanity. When I met Burmese migrant workers and refugees during my recent visit to Thailand, many cried out, "Don't forget us." They meant, don't forget our plight, don't forget to do what you can to help us, don't forget we also belong to your world. When the Nobel Committee awarded the Peace Prize to me, they were recognizing that the oppressed and the isolated in Burma were also part of the world. They were recognizing the oneness of humanity. So for me, receiving the Nobel Peace Prize means, personally, extending my concern for democracy and human rights beyond national borders. The Nobel Peace Prize opened up a door in my heart. The Burmese concept of peace can be explained as the happiness arising from the cessation of factors that militate against the harmonious and the wholesome. The word Nyenjan translates literally as the beneficial coolness that comes when a fire is extinguished. Fires of suffering and strife are raging around the world. In my own country, hostilities have not yet ceased in the far north. To the west, communal violence resulting in arson and murder were taking place just several days before I started out on the journey that has brought me here today. News of atrocities in other reaches of the earth abound. Reports of hunger, disease, displacement, joblessness, poverty, injustice, discrimination, prejudice, bigotry. These are our daily fare. Everywhere there are negative forces eating away at the foundations of peace. Everywhere can be found thoughtless dissipation of material and human resources that are necessary for the conservation of harmony and happiness in our world. The First World War represented a terrifying waste of youth and potential, a cruel squandering of the positive forces of our planet. The poetry of that era has a special significance for me because I first read it at a time when I was the same age as many of those young men who had to face the prospect of withering before they had barely blossomed. A young American fighting with the French Foreign Legion wrote before he was killed in action in 1916 that he would meet his death at some disputed barricade, on some scarred slope of battered hill, or at midnight in some flaming town. Youth and love and life perishing forever in senseless attempts to capture nameless, unremembered places. And for what? Nearly a century on, we have yet to find a satisfactory answer. Are we not still guilty, if to a less violent degree, of recklessness, of improvidence, with regard to our future and our humanity? War is not the only arena where peace is done to death. Wherever suffering is ignored, there will be the seeds of conflict, for suffering degrades and embitters and enrages. A positive aspect of living in isolation was that I had ample time in which to ruminate over the meanings of words and precepts that I had known and accepted all my life. As a Buddhist, I had heard of dukkha, generally translated as suffering, since I was a small child. Almost on a daily basis, I heard elderly and sometimes not so elderly people around me murmuring dukkha, dukkha, when they suffered from aches and pains or when they met with some small annoying mishaps. However, it is only during my years of house arrest that I got around to investigating the nature of the 6 great dukkha. These are to be conceived, to age, to sicken, to die, to be parted from those one loves, to be forced to live in propinquity with those one does not love. I examined each of the great sufferings, not in a religious context, but in the context of our ordinary, everyday lives. If suffering were an unavoidable part of our existence, we should try to alleviate it as far as possible in practical, earthly ways. I mulled over the effectiveness of antenatal and postnatal programs and mother and child care, of adequate facilities for the aging population, of comprehensive health services, of compassionate nursing and hospices. I was particularly intrigued by the last 2 kinds of suffering: to be parted from those one loves and to be forced to live in propinquity with those one does not love. What experience might our Lord Buddha have undergone in his own life that he had included those 2 states among the great sufferings? I thought of prisoners of conscience and refugees, of migrant workers and victims of human trafficking, of that great mass of the uprooted of the earth who have been torn away from their homes, parted from families and friends, and forced to live out their lives among strangers who were not always welcoming. We are fortunate to be living in an age when social welfare and humanitarian assistance are recognized not only as desirable, but necessary. I am fortunate to be living in an age when the fate of prisoners of conscience anywhere has become the concern of peoples everywhere. An age when democracy and human rights are widely, if not universally, accepted as the birthright of all. How often during my years under house arrest have I drawn strength from my favorite passages in the preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspirations of the common people. It is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. If I am asked why I am fighting for human rights in Burma, the above passages will provide the answer. If I am asked why I am fighting for democracy in Burma, it is because I believe that democratic institutions and practices are necessary for the guarantee of human rights. Over the past year, there has been signs that the endeavors of those who believe in democracy and human rights are beginning to bear fruit in Burma. There have been changes in a positive direction. Steps towards democratization have been taken. If I advocate cautious optimism, it is not because I do not have faith in the future, but because I do not want to encourage blind faith. Without faith in the future, without the conviction that democratic values and fundamental human rights are not only necessary, but possible for our society, our movement could not have been sustained throughout the destroying years. Some of our warriors fell at their post. Some deserted us.